Next topic is America in the Gilded Age, Part 1. I have no idea how many parts this will take. It'll spill over past this week. America in the Gilded Age, that's a time period running roughly about the last third of the 19th century, from the post Civil War years down to the end of the century. Gilded Age. First of all, what does the word gilded mean? Something is gilded if it's either gold plated or looks like it's gold plated. And the term Gilded Age was put in play by none other than Mark Twain himself, who, uh, collaborating with a co author, the only time he ever did that, published a novel in 1873 called The Gilded Age, and it satirized the materialistic values of that era. So when some name like that sticks, it has to resonate on more than one level. And one level would be that just the highly decorative styles of everything from architecture to dress to all of that, the way people spoke in formal settings, it was all, in a way, gilded. It's like everything has to look like it's gold plated, not physically, but metaphorically. There's another level, and that's the fact that if you take something that is gilded and scrape off the veneer of gold or pseudo gold plating, you find something far less valuable underneath. That's like America. It has a veneer of middle class gentility. You're genteel if you're nice and courteous and all of that. So, and some middle class did live that way. They tended to be nice people with nice jobs and nice neighbors, living in nice neighborhoods, all of that. And that was America's sort of mental image of itself. Beneath that social veneer, however, you find vast numbers of people living far more grimy, gritty lives. You have exploited factory workers, farmers struggling to survive. Many people did not have nice lives at all. So it's the Gilded Age. Okay, the first actual question there is, what evidence is there that Americans were becoming more materialistic after the Civil War than they had been before? To put it in perspective, I have to inform you that Americans have pretty much always been notoriously materialistic compared to, say, the Europe that their ancestors had come from. Um, in the first half of the 19th century, especially, it was almost like a cottage industry. European observers would come to America, sort of take the tour, and go back and write a book describing it all. There are two in particular. By far the more significant, a Frenchman named Alexis de Tocqueville published a book entitled Democracy in America. He came over and made his little trip, and it was a big trip, in 1831. It was a very, very perceptive book. He told us things about ourselves we hadn't even observed ourselves. And the other one that's more about just the way people got along, the Domestic Manners of the Americans by Frances Trollope. She was an English woman. I don't know for sure whether she's a fan, but both de Tocqueville and Trollope, and most, if not all the others, they were all, one thing that struck them was how materialistic Americans were and how focused we were on getting rich. Maybe not everybody, but it seemed to be a strong current in the value system. Now, if Europeans had been like that, they wouldn't have thought it was odd. But Europeans weren't like that. Europe had fixed social classes, and moving from one to the other was virtually impossible. So there's really not much point in thinking about such things. Um, so we were more materialistic than Europeans. Uh, now, so Americans have always been materialistic, so they're getting more so after the Civil War, or at least they're less likely to apologize for it. Pre-Civil War America, you had plenty of people that would like to get rich and are working hard to do it, but they might feel a little bit guilty about it because the culture was still quite saturated with specifically Christian values, even among people who were not practitioners of religion. And there's a sin called avarice. I'll put it on the screen there. And that's basically materialism, wanting to get rich. It's a little bit different. Well, some call it, okay, greed. Greed would be a near synonym. Covetousness is wanting what somebody else has. Avarice or greed is just wanting more than you got. What makes it a sin? I would suggest probably it's avarice means that you have rejected the provision that God has made for you and want something more on top of that. Or you see money as your true ultimate source of security. Anyway, for one thing, big wars almost always have a coarsening effect on social values, and the Civil War certainly did. Pro-Civil War Americans would be less likely to ask God's forgiveness for hankering after wealth. And the war had created a large number of new, really seriously rich people. Here's the before and after. The year before the Civil War broke out, 1860, it's estimated there were only about 50 millionaires in the United States. And believe it or not, a third of them lived in a little Mississippi River town called Natchez, Mississippi. They were cotton brokers. You can make a lot of money at that. Their houses are still there, by the way. 5 years later, there are over 1,000 millionaires in the United States, and virtually none of them live in the South. And some of them are millionaires many times over. And you know the difference in what they call old money and new money? The old rich and the new rich. Which of those two, if I were in class, I would ask you this, just what impression you have. Which of those people are more likely to flaunt their wealth? Conventional wisdom says new money, the nouveau riche, as the French call them. Excuse me, just a second here. I'd have to use a completely different voice if there are 49 of you sitting out in front of me there. The new rich, okay, their status has changed and they want everybody to know it. So they're much more likely to flaunt their wealth. Now, the people who inherited their wealth, and by the way, in America, social class, unlike in other parts of the world, by the way, social class comes down to either you or some ancestor of yours making a big pile of money. It's materialistically based. But the old money people, they know who they are, and they don't have anything to prove. And they don't care what you or I think about them. They simply don't care at all. So they're not as likely to flaunt it. The new money people are. So what if your entire wealthy class are new money people? There's going to be some serious flaunting going on. The first ever American multimillionaire was John Jacob Astor, who I believe he had a fleet of merchant ships, and then he's into railroads, stuff like that. It wasn't until 1835 that we had even one multimillionaire. So after the war, the Astors are still there, but they've been overshadowed by the Vanderbilts. Commodore Vanderbilt. I could be wrong about Astor. He was in the fur trading business for sure. But there was the old man Vanderbilt, and he had two wealthy sons, and they built a railroad empire. And just the houses they built for themselves. They had a block-sized mansion in New York City. They had a mansion. One of the two brothers had a mansion in Asheville, North Carolina. It's right on the border between North Carolina and Tennessee. It's called Biltmore. It has 400 rooms. It could go toe-to-toe with most European royal palaces. And of course, everybody has to have a summer house in Newport, Rhode Island. That was the playground of the rich. They would congregate there for about 6 weeks in the late summer for their social season. One of the Vanderbilt brothers built a house there in the 1890s. I believe it still stands, good shape. They still own it. It's called The Breakers. And it has 70 rooms. all done up very ornately, extremely expensive to build. And don't you love it when these guys outsmart themselves? Toured that place one time. Wouldn't want to live there, but it had a bathroom. That's a new thing in those days. And just to be fancy, they got this big old bathtub carved from a solid block of marble. Could there be a problem with that? Maybe so. You ever heard of something called heat transfer? The servants had to fill it up with hot water and empty it and fill it and empty it and fill it 4 times before they got the marble warm enough so it didn't just suck the heat out of the water. Way to go, guys. Try again next time. The other Vanderbilt brother built for his new wife a house still known as the Marble House. I've been there too. It contains something like $16 million worth of decorative marble installed by workmen who are being paid 25 cents an hour or a day, or something like that. That house, nobody ever really lived there. He got the house as a wedding present. Tom promptly turned around and divorced the guy just to score points and married another super rich guy. So nobody ever really lived there except a caretaker family. If I were to wake up in a place like that, my first thought would be that I'd been buried alive. So, they threw parties for each other, where the party favorites for each guest would cost more than an honest working man would make in 2, 3, 4 years. This was all written up in detail in the society pages in the newspapers. Okay? Before there were sports pages, there were society pages, and people just ate that up. And there was surprisingly little resentment of the rich because they were perceived as being common people who'd made good, and if they can do it, I can do it. So you don't resent them, you hope to score big and emulate them. All right, so you have that example out there for people to look upon and lust after. So the evidence beyond that is a whole crop of books aimed at people who want to get rich or justify being rich. You didn't really see that before the Civil War. But even now, if you were to go to a well-stocked bookstore, you wouldn't have to look very far to find books aimed at people who would like to get rich or be better salesmen or something like that. Often it's motivational stuff. They're still around. There's a man named Zig Ziglar who's a popular speaker, and he had this book called See You at the Top. I never read it. Maybe that's why I'm not at the top. Oh well, there's a great deal to be said for just being satisfied. There was a man named Stephen Covey who had a sort of franchise, 7 habits of the very successful or highly successful people. There's 7 habits of this, 7 habits of that. So that sort of thing is still around, lots of it. Now, there was a crop of these that shows up after the Civil War, between the Civil War and the end of the century. No particular order. The first one, and I'm going to save him for for part 2 of this, was P.T. Barnum. Known mainly as a circus man, but he has a bit wider significance than that. P.T. Barnum apparently invented popular level entertainment. P.T. Barnum cashed in on the fact that normal people would line up and pay good money just to gawk at stupid stuff. You didn't have to be Shakespeare. You didn't have to be Mozart or Beethoven. Stupid stuff, okay? And not highbrow stuff. And he cashed in on that. He had a sort of slogan, there's a sucker born every minute. And a sucker is a foolish person easily separated from their money. And Barnum published a book, and I haven't got the title quite right, but it's close enough. The book was entitled something like this, The Art of Getting Money. Wonder what that's about. The thesis was that getting rich in America is so utterly easy. You'd have to be a fool. You'd have to be stupid to avoid it. We'll check out the other guys in part 2.